Hi y'all, it's Freeze Cracked here again. Hey, I'm not flint napping today. What I'm going to do is talk about angles and stuff, try and help you understand some of the stuff that's easier maybe to show you on paper than it is in with flint napping. So I'm just going to be drawing a little bit on paper and talking about stuff a little bit. But first I want to show you, this is a lot of flint nappers, at least Texas nappers' goals, to be able to make a paper thin, very razor sharp, gorgeous Montel point. And this is a cast of somebody's that did it a long time ago. But what happens for a lot of us instead, especially when we start out, is we make little things that I call turtles, where it's nowhere close to what we would like to make, and very frustrating because we say, okay, why am I making turtles? Why am I not making thin, great arrowheads? Well, basically, it's all about the angles. And the problem with flint napping is that where you swing is not where your crack goes because of the conchoidal fracture. And stop me if you've heard this, but conchoidal fracture basically means that when you swing down on the edge of a rock. Wherever your final direction of force is, the crack that you cause comes off of that in a cone basically at 100 degrees of angle. So instead of the crack going down here, the crack goes off there, and then this would be out in the air somewhere. That doesn't hit your rock at all. But when you hit that edge of the rock, the crack goes up off there. So right off the bat, you have to somehow train your brain through hundreds, if not thousands of hours of breaking rock to understand that where you're swinging is like 50 degrees off from where you're cracking, and to make that mental adjustment instantly just by knowing that. By the way, this other angle is like 130 degrees to the side, and this is like 100 degrees. So I guess you're off like 50 degrees from where you swing. I still think, and I think I've already said this on one of my videos, it's easier for you to try and create a very consistent swing and then just move your rock as necessary, tilt it up, tilt it down, tilt it way down, do whatever, but let your support hand do the adjustment, if you will, rather than you trying to adjust your swing every time and get down low and hit in, or come up high and hit down, or whatever. But you still do a lot of changes in the angles at which you swing. For instance, when you start out a rock, most of the time, or a lot of the time, if you just got a little nub somewhere, or you may even have a square tabular rock, you're almost swinging straight down, because maybe what you want to do is you want to just hit down, you want to knock off a corner. Well, by hitting straight down, you're going to knock off a corner at a 25-degree angle, or rather a 50-degree angle. And that may be an okay angle for you, depending on what you're trying to do after you do that, to flip the thing, in which case, let's see if I can draw it flipped, in which case you'll have it like this, and at that point you've got something you can work with here. You can take your thick abrader, or you can take a little thing and bevel down a little bit on this and raise this edge just a little bit to be able to drive it on the edge for a thinning flake. Or if you're still in an initial stage of reduction where you're trying to remove a lot of mass, you can support well underneath, and you can drive in, at the proper angle above the edge on the side of the thing to drive your flake through the mass and have it go across, as opposed to just running a thin flake along the bottom. And I've said this before, but the lower you hit, the thinner your flake. And once you get up to the center line, you start getting into danger zone and not being able to do much except bevel down and come down, but with certain exceptions. But at any rate, so learning to memorize those angles is a real problem for a lot of people. But basically, one of the things that you may notice is on these are some things that I was messing with when I first started out. And what you can see is I've got a great taper to the edge, and I've got the edge regularized to the center line. That's a worthless situation for further thinning. If you don't want to make turtles, don't do that. basically you need to have, if you don't want to make a turtle, say this is your turtle. Can you see that turtle? Okay, if you have a turtle like this, actually I drew it wrong, but because I've got a platform here below the center line. But if you have a turtle like this, you really can't thin it because your flakes, despite what you've heard about convexity being great, you can't run up and over stuff very well. You can trap stuff with leather sometimes and get over some degrees of a median ridge, but not this thick. So what you actually have to do if you've got a situation like this is you've got to knock, you really would like to tilt this downward slightly and knock straight down on it to cut off about like this. So really you need an angle, you need your strike angle about like that, which that's why you would turn it down, because you'd be striking backwards otherwise. Tilt this down a little bit and then strike straight down to create a bevel like this, where you then can abrade the crap out of this and flip it over and try and hit straight into it like here and cut off some of that mass. And from what you just saw that I drew, you're going to hit hard because you failed to cut through a bunch of rock to start with, and now you've got to cut through a bunch of rock to make up for your prior omission. The real issue there is, even with glass, even with obsidian, you'd be surprised when you're trying to cut through several inches of it how much mass and the strike mass and or strike velocity is necessary. You have to hit. Let's see. So anyway, your perfect platforms are below the center line, and I'm going to show you like a platform for if you want to do a thick flake. If you want to do a thick flake, you knock off a bevel about like that, and you'd like to hit in on it. You'd like an angle about like this, and drive in on it with a big billet and hit it somewhere here. Actually, you'll be hitting it downward a little bit, but hit it right like there, and put your crack off to go through and do as much good as you can there. Now, a lot depends upon your support. Let me flip this a second. Oh, that's no good. Get another sheet. What you can do sometimes is your support allows you to get away with hitting at an angle that's wrong. Because if you've got your hand under here, that's your fingers, and you're pushing and holding the edge together, then if you hit downward on this and hit it right there, well, the flake can't hinge down, and the fact that you're supporting it right there, the first thing you do is you get your initial bubble of percussion, but then it evens out and it tends to run. And one thing that's interesting about flakes is somehow the way that the vibrations are occurring or something, they kind of know where they are beneath the surface of the rock, and they tend to run in like almost the same depth, although it tapers sometimes from end to end, but the thickness of the flake is fairly interestingly consistent in tapering as it runs across there. Your initial bulb, the depth of that and how big it is going to have to do with the hardness of the rock and also how sudden the force transfer is. So really what you end up with, say you hit straight down on a flat surface, people say, okay, well, here's your shatter. No, not really. What it is, it looks more like this. When you hit straight down, you create that initial cone. I mean, it's like it's rounded kind of. It's the bulb. And then that kind of straightens out as soon as the crack gets settled down a little bit, and it tends to run straight out. But you have this to contend with, because every time you hit, you create those, and of course that gives you your deltas, and it gives you the concavities that you then need to brush down and abrade down on, or trim or whatever to get rid of those little concavities before you start going back into stuff or whatever. I don't know how much good I can do with just drawing stuff on here because it's hard to think about what to draw next or whatever. On your platforms, if you're trying to do abo work, you know, a hammerstone platform is steeper. If you're trying to hit above the edge on a with a copper bopper or something like that, it's a little less steep. And then both of those are completely different from what you're trying to do when you're hitting out on the edge. With antler, you really, antler likes a fairly thin, fairly acute angle, fairly thin edge, and it's got to be stiff enough to where it doesn't collapse, but it needs to be kind of sharp enough to where when the antler hits it, it kind of digs in a little bit to the antler and sticks, so the antler can rip that crack and get it going. Because it's not sticky like copper is. Copper you can hit on an abraded surface or whatever, and it's just sort of sticks on top of the antler. It kind of digs in and rips it off. And then on a copper edge, you know, you can get away with hitting on a fairly broad degree range of acuteness with the copper edge, just depending upon how hard you hit. But one thing that is important to remember, if you get yourself too steep an angle, you can't then drive in at the proper angle sometimes to do what you want to do here. If you get it too steep, you might be able to raise this a little bit by beveling down and hit and do a thin flake under there. But if what you're trying to do is cut off the top of a turtle, well, how steep it is determines how you can hit it. If you come in from the side, you can't get your sometimes you can't get your angle good enough. You can't hit it the right angle because of the steepness of this to drive your flake through the way you want to and make the crack go the way you want to. So anyway, boy, this is a lousy video so far. I think I'll just stop doing this and I'll show you some issues on some of the bifaces I've collected over the years. This is an early one. This is Georgetown flint. This is one that I made from a big nodule, and it's fairly early on in my career. And what you can see in looking at it is you can see, well, okay, so here's a fairly big flake, but it was a big rock. And that flake goes about to the center line, which is no good. Here's a thin one that kind of went further, so that was, I got lucky on that one, and that one's pretty good. But actually that one looks like about the only one on this face that goes past the center line. So nothing I was doing here was good. I may have thought it was, and I was shaping the thing, but basically it's a huge turtle. It's really thick and really fat. And you can see this other side. Well, this flake was pretty good, so that one's one that's okay. And none of the others go past the center line. And here's one coming in from up here, but the distance it ran is about even, like going to the center line. It's just not really very good. So we were not thinning this thing. Also, if you will notice, the edges are real tapered. And they're back, it's at the center line. So this shows that at this point in time, I had no idea how to thin anything. And I don't know what I thought I knew back then, but I didn't know because I've tapered my edges, they're back at the center line. I don't have big ridges. I don't have anywhere to go. And basically to fix this, and yeah, I could fix it. I'd have to lose some width to fix it. But what I have to do is I just have to knock down some of this stuff and get the edges away from the center line and thick, and then have to heavily abrade them and whack the crap out of some of the platforms and cut through this mass and cut it down. Let's look at another one. This one's really bad. You say, well, should I be showing you my bad work? I don't care. This is raw rock. Just about everything I hit's raw, but this was raw rock, and this is just yellow wristing. This is an example of being tentative on stuff quite a bit. But again, you'll see, there's one flake that looks like it may have gone past the center line, but nothing else does. They're all coming up to the hill and stopping. You get too much convexity to start with, and then you can never deal with it from then on. And then look over here. So here's what happens when you do that. Now, this may have been a hard rock. I don't remember. I think it may have been a little bit of hard rock, and may have had a little. Some rocks have a hard spots in them, but there was nothing wrong particularly with the angles hit in on any of these flakes. The reason this failed and left this knot here is because of a lack of power, and it was probably two different things. It probably was that I failed to make the edges very stout, and also that I didn't hit them hard enough with a bopper or something that was big enough. And so a large percentage of hinges, you can tell I really probably was not hitting into concavities there. I just wasn't hitting well, and I wasn't transferring energy in sufficient amount to cut through that lousy ½ inch extra that it would have taken me to do that. And on this one over here, that you can see, I would have right here, step right there, and right over here, I just should have hit a lot harder, but I probably didn't have the edge quality to do it because I didn't know about edges very well probably. But again, what do you see wrong? The edges are right at the center line, which is only good for beveling down basically. You don't take flakes dead through the middle of your point. You'd fold it every time. So, and the edges are thin and tapered, and they're just not adequate for what I needed to do. Let's see. I could show you this kind of crummy stuff all day long. Look at this. At some point, this is going to get embarrassing, but y'all are the ones sitting here watching. At least I got enough sense not to watch other people's bad work. I mean, this is about as fat as it can be. And again, if you look at it, it's real easy to see why. Everything was trying to climb the hill, and it would get up at or near the top of the hill and stop, go out. Nothing is thinning. None of these flakes are thinning. You know, you got one that went to the center line and maybe a microcosm over it, but microcosm? That went a little past it, but it's still an anemic flake. A little past it, maybe a little bit, but I mean, this stuff's terrible. And edges at the center line and tapered, not stout. Have to braid the crap out of those to do any good. Okay, so here's an example of when you get industrious and you're going to do something really big and special when you're not good yet and don't know what you're doing and don't know how to cut through mass. So you decide, hey, you know, I see all these other guys making these big wide points. I'm going to make one too. And this is actually heated rock, but it's a little bit steppy rock. But anyway, I'm not going to blame the rock. This was me. And what you see there is some of these things that I was trying to do with thinning should have occurred earlier in the reduction process and have been done with big, thick flakes while the thing still had more mass. Because now it's not particularly thick, and it would have been better to take some of these flakes coming in with more power. And you can see, didn't make it past the center line, didn't even make it to the center line, didn't make it to the center line, didn't make it to the center line, didn't make it to the center line. Some of it has to do with support, and probably at this stage in my development I was not doing good back edge support to try and artificially increase the mass of the rock. I may also not have been doing great support underneath the front edge to keep it from moving. Because if you make that thing rigidly tight and supported, your flakes will tend to run better. But at any rate, some of this too probably had to do with the fact that the edges were not thick enough and not abraded enough and not enough ridges for the flakes to run. And I wasn't hitting hard enough, probably. I just see all kinds of errors in judgment on this, but one of the things that should be real obvious when you look at this is where are the big nice ridges to run flakes on? They're just not there. I had smoothed this thing before I got it down to the final shape and size close to that of what I was trying to make, whatever that would have been, I don't know. But when you smooth off your faces and you get rid of your big, like when you hit secondary little blending flakes on all your nice big ridges that you created with your big thickness removing flakes, well, your ridges are gone. Those were your tools for running flakes a long ways and everything. So um, don't start trying to finish your point before you're halfway through reducing the mass and getting the thinness down and getting it where you want it. Another thing you'll notice on this is obviously I was a big fan of continuous platforms. You see it really, really well in here. This edge has all been turned the same direction, and it's more or less straight and doesn't have any sinuous nature to it or anything. Well, yeah, you can hit those kind of platforms, but they're not great for doing big old thick thinning flakes. They're better for doing short blending flakes and stuff. Okay, so here, I don't know if that's going to work or not. Here we're getting a little better. This was I suppose, a more recent thing, but actually, I don't know, some of those scars look kind of regular, so that's maybe indirect percussion that I used on those. But what you're looking at here, of course, it's smaller, but it's considerably flatter. It doesn't have that huge turtle shapes anymore. And I didn't, in this particular case, wait till it was down to the final point size to try and do a lot of that initial thickness reduction. And I do see some flakes that look like they went fairly far. But it's still a problem at this stage to be doing dramatic thinning. It's better to try and knock the big flakes in as much as you can and do thinning early on. Oh my goodness, I'm already at 22 minutes? That's ridiculous. Okay, I'll show you one more and then I'll shut up for now. This is more recent. This is fairly hard rock. It's called Harvester Burlington. But anyway, you can see now, you can see quite a bit of flatness. It's a pretty big rock. You can see quite a bit of flatness. You can see larger flakes that run in further. You can see I left ridges and haven't eliminated ridges by blending them out because I may use them for more big flakes. This side isn't as good, but you can see I'm leaving ridges, and like here, this step and everything, well, I can use ridges to come in and take out some of the stuff that's there. But when you look at the edges, you can see I haven't really made an effort to bring, I mean, it's not far off the center line. I stopped this at a point where I needed to bevel some stuff down and go again because I'd finished a round of using the available stuff here. But you can see the deltas and stuff are still on there. I haven't tried to remove it all. And at this point, I would bevel all this edge off probably and try and get it sinuous through braiding both directions with a heavier braider and get me back some thickness and some stuff to do some more thinning as I came in with it. Anyway, so there's some thoughts. I don't know if they're good, but talk to you later. Freeze crack.